So I hope we will start with the welcoming remarks of Dr. Kortunov and Dr. Narbone.
Sure. Let's do that.
So we are there. So we are really glad to welcome all of you today for this joint Russian International Affairs Council and the Middle East Directions program at the European University Institute event, our webinar, which is devoted to the issue of regional security system in the Persian Gulf and the gradual approach towards this new security system, as we named this event today. So I would like to give the floor for welcome remarks to Dr. Andrey Kortunov, who is Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council, and then to Dr. Luigi Narbone, who is Director of the Middle East Directions Program at the European University Institute. Dr. Kortunov, please.
Thank you, Ruslan. First of all, let me say that it is not just my honor, but also my pleasure to open this event with the European University Institute in Florence. Definitely, this is one of the partners of my personal choice, but I hope that it is also a partner of choice for the Russian International Affairs Council. We observe your activities for a couple of years, and I'm very glad to see how you're making progress in various fields of research related to Europe and its neighborhood. It's a pity that we cannot have an offline discussion at the Institute, but I hope it's not the last time that we get together. And definitely we would be happy to pursue this cooperation further. In terms of our today's topic, it is on gradual approach towards a new security system in the Persian Gulf. And of course, this is a flavor of the season in many ways, because I think that in many countries of the region, but also in many countries outside of the region, they are trying to come up with innovative ideas on how the Gulf security should be managed. And there are many theories floating around. Some of them were reflected in a recently published book by the European University Institute, and I also contributed a small chapter to this book on what we could and what we could not expect in the Gulf area. Let me say that, of course, we can explore various models of regional security, including models based on external hegemonic powers. And in this case, it is definitely the United States, but there are many uncertainties related to the US engagement in the region. And these uncertainties are still with us, despite the change of the US administration in Washington, D.C. We can talk about a regional bilateral system, which would involve an Arab NATO in this way or another, something like a military alliance led by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But again, there are many reservations about this system. I don't want to dwell on that in detail, but this system doesn't look very realistic and very feasible, at least in the nearest future. Of course, there are proposals on collective security system in the Gulf area. And again, there are many proponents of the collective security arrangement, but many would argue that the time has not come, because definitely it would be premature to talk about the existing preconditions for such a system. So that's why we, at least I would like to emphasize the adjective of gradual. We should think about a dynamic approach which would allow us to move from relatively small, maybe technical means of providing for regional security to something more complex, more sophisticated, and maybe in the end of the day, we will come to a collective security system in the region. Uh, my take has always been that the best way to proceed would be to start with confidence building in the Gulf area, especially confidence building measures related to naval activities in the Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, and in surrounding seas. And that might involve gradual development of mill-to-mill contacts at various levels, including operational levels. It definitely involves, or it might involve, various types of hotlines between Iran and its Arab counterparts. It might involve measures of de-alerting and de-escalation measures which would gradually or might gradually lead to regional arms control and limits on certain types of military activities. I think that we should all agree that for the time being, there are quite significant disagreements between states of the region on the very fundamental issues on what is legitimate and what is not, what is fair and what is not, what states can do and what they cannot do towards their neighbors. That's why any system that we're ready to contemplate at this stage is likely to be an ad hoc system rather than a system that will last for a long time. If it is successful, it might evolve into something more significant and something more stable. I don't want to take too much of your time. Let me just conclude with saying that this topic is very interesting both in academic terms and in terms of applied policy advice. We at RIAC will continue to track it, and I hope that we will be able to generate some products which might be of interest not just to us but to our partners in Europe, including that in the European University Institute. I'm looking forward to productive and candid and hopefully entertaining discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kortunov. Professor Narbone, yes, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank very much the Russian International Affairs Council for partnering with us and organizing today this event. We also, of course, have already had several opportunities to work together, and we hope that we will continue to do so in the future. Let me just take on what Andrey was mentioning. We in the Med Directions have been studying for now five or 6 years the main conflict dynamics in the region and looking at some of the cross-regional trends and dynamics in the political economy and in the socio-political sphere. But we thought that it was important to look at an area which demands increasingly attention, which is the Gulf region. And that is the reason why last year we started the Regional Security Initiative, which is basically a way to look at the dynamics of insecurity in the regions, and also but with the view to explore possible steps that might lead us towards de-escalation and hopefully dialogue and cooperation in the region. And of course, we are very much wary of the fact that talking about building a security system in the Persian Gulf region is a very complex matter. It has been on the table for several years, if not decades, with to no avail. Unfortunately, we have seen over the past couple of years tension rising and to the brink of possible all-out war. And fortunately, there was always a way out, and the countries in the regions step back from the abyss, which is also the title of the ebook which we recently published, and which, of course, we were very honored and fortunate to have Andrey Kortunov contribution, but there are several other contributions from scholars and practitioners from all over the world. Try to take a fresh look at what could be done to address the issue of building a security system in the region. And we discussed this topic at length in our annual conference in May in Florence, online. Unfortunately, partly blended, so we do hope that we will be able to resume our in-present activity next year and have another opportunity to bring all of you to Florence to discuss. But let me say also that I very much agree with Andrey on the fact that the key to the matter is to build a gradual approach towards a new security system in the region. I think today the part of the debate, Farzam will look at why many initiatives to build a system in the region have failed in the past, and why it is so difficult to exit the security dilemmas and the continuous increase in escalatory dynamics that we have witnessed recently. And yet, we think that there is space for perhaps looking very broadly at opening up channels of communications, opening up, increasing diplomatic activities, and look perhaps at the potential of what we define in the book as non-traditional security instrument, which has basically all the areas which have an impact on the security of the region, but they could also have an impact on promoting de-escalation and dialogue. And we refer, for instance, to all the matters that have an impact on both sides of the Gulf Sea in terms of environment, climate change, energy security, matters that have to do with cultural diplomacy that could have a positive impact if pursued to build the confidence which is needed to exit the current this current state of tension and in the region. So that is a matter that, of course, requires careful crafting and multi-stakeholder actions. So we have very much interest in exploring all the initiatives and approaches, and we had also in the ebook we were very keen in having different views from different external actors on what could be done to pursue the path towards dialogue and cooperation. I mean, we are all also very much aware that all the countries in the Gulf are facing multiple transitions that affect the future of energy, the transition towards green energy, and the impact that they may have on economies which are heavily dependent on oil exports. They are all impacted by very heavy trends in terms of climate change, and they need to put in place measures to mitigate such negative trends. And that we all know that is much more better done if it's done in terms of transnational cooperation than at the national level. So incentives are there to move away from the current confrontational environment towards a more cooperative environment. The issue should be what can be done, what we can all do, both in terms of scholarly community, in terms of those of us who advise policymakers, as well as the policymakers in the regions and outside the regions, to create a more favorable environment. And I think I will leave it here, and I'm sure that we will have a very interesting discussion afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that we have interesting direction of our discussion already, and we hope that we will only, develop this approach. Definitely, what is we are we are discussing the region which is highly competitive in its nature, while we are still trying to find the ways of how to discuss it in a more cooperative way, and in this way, Professor Narbone already mentioned that we are, first what we should do is to analyze why the previous, some previous previous actions failed in order to build some security architecture, some security system in this part of the world. And here I would like to bring Dr. Divsallar on, on the issue of causes for previous failures to build a regional security, and maybe ways how to, how do you see in your perspective how to move forward in these conditions. So please.
Thank you so much, Ruslan. Okay, first, let me also thank Andrey for giving green light for this session, and also you, Ruslan, for organizing. And also, Andrey, thanks again for joining us in the book and writing such an interesting paper. Actually, it's correct that I agree, and I think many have the same idea that what was done before was not successful in terms of building a cooperative regional security framework. That's the beginning or the main focus of my intervention today, on the sense that I think there are several reasons we need to take more deeper to realize and use them as the lessons of the future actions. I could say that from my understanding, at least, two dominant approaches were used in the before or previous experiences of building a security system in the Persian Gulf. One of the first one, which actually justifies many of the U.S. interventions in the region, was the concept of a rogue state. So the rogue state, elimination of the rogue state, will change the security environment and can build a better security system. That narrative, basically, we know that failed and it didn't work. But also there was another narrative that I think was quite dominant, and that was the grand bargain concept, in the sense that calls or attempts that wanted a kind of a sudden change in the security environment and make it to a better security environment by a couple of, let's say, either comprehensive ways or by several actions. For example, the Iranian Hope Initiative, I think, could be categorized on these types of grand bargain models that asks, though there is the mentality of the process on it, but also ask for sudden changes. I think at least 5 factors, contributed in these failures. The first is that all actors, as also somehow mentioned by Andrey, have different perceptions regarding the urgency of the crisis. So basically the strategic assessment of different actors that why the security system should be revised is completely divergent. And that goes back to the understanding of the priority of the region for many of the actors at the international level, and also the region's major powers' strategy to resist and, let's say, adapt with this threatening security environment. For example, in the case of Iran and Saudi Arabia, I think both countries are adapting themselves with the security environment, and that reduces the urgency, as many may argue. But also in the case of, for example, the Europe, that's quite visible that for Europe, the Persian Gulf region is not the first priority when it comes to its neighborhood. The first priority might be better defined as the Eastern Mediterranean or North Africa, which the direct threats or implications are coming to the European lands. So that divergence of the urgency, I think, is a very important factor that we need to somehow respond in future attempts. But there's also a second factor, and that is about the challenge of transition, what I call. I mean, many times the previous attempts, when they called for change of a policy of a particular actor, they ignore on the fact that maybe the risk of a change of a policy for a certain actor is higher than the continuation of the current threatening environment. That was a very clear logic that many regional actors use the case of the Libya and Gaddafi, in the sense that immediate change of a security policy can bring new series of crises which are more existential than the current threats. Most previous attempts basically were silent when it comes to this transition period. This transition period basically means from when the states start to change their security policy until the time that the new security system is emerging, which is less confrontational, or we can say more cooperative. The other factor, I think, is a missing domestic element of most of the calls for security rebuilding in the region. I think we cannot ignore the fact that many regional decisions by states like Iran, like Saudi Arabia, has certain values for their domestic politics. For example, in the case of Iran, going to Syria and going to Iraq has certain important legitimacy benefits for the Islamic Republic when it comes to showing itself as a working political system. By bringing or arguing over the issue of its power to secure its the military threat to its country. So basically, there are interests for maybe political fractions, maybe the whole internal domestic factors for actors to pursue a certain policy at the regional level. Most calls basically don't see that this benefit cannot be easily compromised by more cooperative security. So, of course, maybe it could be challenging to say that continued escalation could benefit directly the certain political fractions, but the whole process of certain strategies may benefit. And the fourth factor, which I think is again important, is the issue of the agenda setting. I think we have also a serious problem in the agenda setting. The fact that there is not a certain agenda agreed among all the stakeholders who wants to enter to the region, or they are already the major powers in the region. Maybe JCPOA and non-proliferation issues are one of the few domains that there is a kind of agreement over how to deal with it, or at least to prevent, let's say, nuclear proliferation. But when we go, for example, to the missile issue or to the other regional policy, the problem of agenda or what the next agenda should be is basically really contested. So the idea that how we can build a consensus agenda is really a complex dynamic that needs to be investigated more. And another factor, which I think could be the final point of my discussion here, is that on the reasons of the failure, I mean, is the fact that when we comparatively review the Persian Gulf with what experiences has been done in Europe, for example, CSCE, it's an interesting observation in the sense that in the CSCE, there was a political demand at the social level. So basically, de-escalation and a more cooperative format of, let's say, regional integration was something that the civil society and the domestic people at the states were looking for that. And there were also political channels to move this, let's say, political demand into a policy level. I think that there is this lack also in the Persian Gulf. Basically, we're not really sure that if that, let's say, social voices for more de-escalatory security dynamic is there, and also if there are enough mechanisms to move these demands into the political, let's say, recommendations. So based on these 5 factors, I wanted to say that changing this, as also both Luigi and Andrey mentioned, changing this process, changing these factors needs a process that requires what I call security building continuum, which I think could be comprised of a number of parallel stages and phases that each can, in a small way, contribute to the better, or to make a more positive security environment. But to do so, if I can have a few more minutes, I would like to say that the first thing I think is to reshape the logic of cooperation. I think, as I mentioned, the issue of urgency refers us to the fact that we need to work on states' strategic assessment and to build the logic of cooperation. 2 factors are quite important here. First is the transnational threats. I think the states in the region should realize that there are sectors or sections of the threats, like the climate, like the cybersecurity, like the health threats, which basically no nation alone can respond to that. But also there are reasons of being worried for the mutual loss. You know, it's interesting that we talk mostly about regional security architecture rebuilding or reshuffling when there is a crisis in 2019 or 2020, but then after a bit of, let's say, calm down the situation, the arguments are really, everyone forgets this urgency or this issue. But I think it's important that we always remember that the issue of possibility of conflict eruption is a very real threat that can bring the loss, mutual loss for all the actors. So I would suggest that we go more on the issue of the logic formation. And then also, as was mentioned, it's the issue of inclusion. I think that's a big question over the fact that how the inclusion should be defined. So I think inclusion basically necessarily is not limited to the states. Also, there's the individuals, as I mentioned earlier. You know, we need to make the domestic request or let's say bottom-up demand for de-escalation in the region, and that means that the individuals or let's say social security should become part of the regional security building agenda or let's say format. So inclusion also goes back to the concept of the collective versus cooperative security. Maybe something that can work in the region, of course, is could be a model of NATO and CSCE at the same time in Europe. That basically means that there is a kind of a collective mechanism, but also there is another line of cooperative security system. So that's mainly my point to the issue of GCC and the fact that while the GCC is working and while the GCC is there as a collective security system, in line, there is the possibility of moving toward a cooperative system that includes all actors. And the other point, and one of my last point, I think, is that it's about the expectations. I think it's quite important that we remain this expectation in law level, because as we define the process, basically each stage of the process, I think, cannot bring us huge and grand bargain type improvements in the security environments, because as we define it small, basically these expectations should remain small. And my final word is about the issue of tools, which also Luigi mentioned that, which was quite an important emphasis of us in this book that was recently published, which we really need to go beyond military security tools in order to expand and make the process sustainable. There are two reasons for that. First is that we have number of issues that have been already, like the religious or like the cultural issues, that have been already securitized in this process of confrontation. So there is an urgent need of desecuritization of these tools, which are basically they're not in the sector of military or intelligence or security or direct or traditional security definition. So in this case, the process of de-escalation should start from other less militarized dynamics, but also there is another reason for expanding the tools, and that is the fact that there are certain areas, as I mentioned earlier, in the transnational threats, that there could be point of cooperations. You know, for example, in the issue of climate, as we have devoted one chapter to that, and there are a growing discussion now, I think, among different think tanks and universities over how we can integrate the issue of climate into regional talks. That really it's a positive movement toward the expanding of the tools. So thank you, Ruslan. I think I should stop here so that the discussion goes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think that you know the very wide range of issues was raised, and definitely I would like to pick up one point you mentioned in the fifth factor when he was talking about the inclusion and exception inclusion issue for the security in the Persian Gulf. Why I'm trying to do it? Because I want to bring our next speaker, Dr. Nikolay Sorkov, from the senior research fellow at the Primakov Institute for World Economy and International Relations. And here, definitely, I would like to ask Dr. Surkov to share with us his view on, Russia's approaches towards the security in the Persian Gulf. Russia is being one of the key players in the region, and the P5 states in the UN. Moreover, there is issue of, inclusive approach towards security, which Russia was trying to raise during the last years, especially for the last couple of decades. I mean, because the issue of whether some players agree to prepare this block logic towards security was in some way against the positive agenda which was viewed by others who were excluded from the security arrangements in this area. So please, Dr. Nikolay Sorkov, could you kindly share with us your assessment?
Yes. Thank you, Ruslan. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to share my insights. And I will try to be brief, and I will talk mainly about pinpoints, and then if there are any questions, I will be happy to expand them. And I also have to mention that recently I was making a research on Russia's policy in the Gulf, and it was part of a larger project, a book about Russian relations with the GCC and Iran. And as far as I know, it was recently published by Springer. Anyhow, so speaking about Russia and the Gulf, first of all, I have to say that the Gulf is important for Russia's strategic interests, and in Moscow, decision makers are convinced that Russia's global influence depends on successful cooperation with this region. And people in Moscow, well, decision makers in Moscow always remember that the GCC states, especially the GCC states, possess great financial, economic, and energy potential. So it's a valuable partner in many domains. And now we can see that there is a window of opportunity to strengthen Moscow's influence in this Gulf region, especially because there are tensions in this Gulf, and from the Russian point of view, they're often escalated artificially, and we believe that the Gulf states are interested in diversifying their foreign policy. So Russia seeks to use this opportunity to fill the vacuum which can be seen there, and Russia is also trying to become a valuable partner, a valuable mediator for all the Gulf states, not only the Gulf monarchies, but also Iran, Iraq, and other players. So I have to say that Russia has many interests in this region. They lie in different domains. It's national security, it's counterterrorism, it's there is an even an Islamic dimension for the Russian policy in this region. And of course, there are economic interests as well. But anyhow, at the moment, Russia is very busy looking for potential partners in this part of the world. Of course, Russia would like to find priority partners, the countries that will become, I wouldn't use the word allies, but the countries that can become strategic partners. Actually, currently, Russian policy is very much about developing strategic partnership. So the Kremlin believes that Russia, with its quite balanced foreign policy and being the only world power that can deal easily both with Iran and Saudi Arabia, can play a vital role. So, of course, priority partners are Iran and Saudi Arabia, but with both countries, we can see that relations are not developing always very smoothly. In both cases, there are some drawbacks, and we can see, for example, that despite actively developing military security, political ties, we don't see very much growth, any growth in economic ties. But what we can say that Russia is also aware of the fact and is trying to find other partners, which are the UAE, for example, the Kuwait, Qatar, and at the moment, I would say the UAE is the most valuable and the most valued and the most important partner. And Russia, from the Russian point of view, it's the UAE. This country is the principal partner in the Gulf because it takes into account Russia's interests in this region, purchases weapons, nuclear technologies, and is ready to invest in Russian economy. Anyhow, also, Russia is trying to develop ties with the Gulf Cooperation Council as an organization in a strategic dialogue format. So what I'm trying to say is that Russia is engaged very actively in different spheres, both in bilateral format and in multilateral format. And Russia is trying, as I said, to use this window of opportunity, seeing that there are tensions, that the U.S. is not inefficient, the U.S. policy is not as efficient as it used to be. So, and this is the situation we have to deal with. That is why one of the aspects of Russia's policy in this region, there are many, because, for example, Russia is not only looking at the political situation. Russia is also very much engaged on other levels. For example, food security. Russia is an important food security player, or Russia is also selling arms to this region. But speaking about the security, first of all, Russia is not interested in siding, for example, with the GCC against Iran or with the Iranians against the GCC, because in both cases there will be problems for Russia. And Russian leadership is trying to compensate the lack of military clout in the Gulf by increasing diplomatic activity and positioning itself as a principal or one of the principal mediators. So that is why Russia proposed a concept of security, a concept of collective security in the Persian Gulf. First of all, actually, the first attempt was made in 2001. And at that moment, that was seen as a good, I would say, reason or a pretext to enter this region, to make Russia more visible in this region. But in 2001, it was mostly about the Iraqi issue and Russian efforts to prevent a crisis concerning Iraq. But then in 2007, on the eve of President Putin's grand tour of the region, this initiative was updated and it was focused on the new challenge, which was the Iranian nuclear program. And this updated concept was welcomed actually by the UAE, for example, in 2007. Anyhow, this concept was still kept, well, the countries of the region didn't accept it as it was hoped, but recently it was renewed once again. And Russia is still working since 2019, offering the countries of the region to consider a collective security mechanism. So some basic things about Russian vision of this mechanism. First of all, the decision makers in Moscow, they understand that it is hardly possible to end the geopolitical rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It's impossible in the short or even in the medium term, because both sides have ambitions, there are many contradictions, but what Russia is really trying to achieve is to make the regional confrontation more predictable and less tense. So that's what Russia is mainly trying to achieve. And the main tools from the Russian point of view must be transparency, especially in the military sphere, and confidence building. And Russia, what is important, Russia is also insisting on the inclusivity, because from the Russian point of view, instead of trying to isolate Tehran, it is necessary to establish a dialogue and ensure, as I said, maximum transparency, especially in the military domain. And of course, Russia insists on a step-by-step approach, like baby steps, our American colleagues often say. So the dialogue might start with an international conference on security and cooperation, where certain principles or certain strategic goals can be defined. By the way, that is needed to actually decide on the logic that was mentioned by the previous speaker. So it might be settled during a conference. And then Russia is also, what I've noticed, is making an emphasis on its experience of the Cold War and its peaceful coexistence with the United States. And in Russia, we have a perception that the Gulf is also witnessing a Cold War, but on a regional scale. I need one more minute and then I'll be, then I'll stop. And but from the Russian point of view, Russian initiative is not simply about signing a non-aggression pact between Iran and the GCC countries, but it's more about being more open and to cooperate. So first step is to establish mutual trust, some transparency, and then move to cooperation. This is important. And what else I want to say? But we are speaking about this security architecture, this new security architecture, this new security environment. But I don't think that it will be possible to move in that direction without actually, first of all, solving the major issue. I mean, the return to the JCPOA without any reservation. And simply because without the JCPOA, it won't be possible to start rebuilding, reestablishing any trust between the Iranians and the Americans, between the Iranians and the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. And I think after that, the parties will be able to start talking about other issues, such as Iranian regional policy, or there are other military programs like ballistic missiles or unmanned aircraft or whatever. But first of all, all the external players should concentrate on reviving the JCPOA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Surkov. On the last point you mentioned, we just wanted to ask our next speaker, Adlan Margoyev from the International Institute at MGIMO, from the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the Institute of International Studies at MGIMO University under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please, Adlan, my question would be to you, mostly connected to the regional dynamics around the JCPOA. Maybe also you could shed the light on how do you see the current dynamics with the U.S.-Iran relations and the elections and its outcomes on this process, and how all of these issues, I understand that it's too much issues, but how they could impact on the regional security agenda in the Persian Gulf area. Please, Adlan.
Thank you, Ruslan. I hope you can hear me well. Yeah, that's great. Good evening and good afternoon. I'm glad to be with you, and thank you for hosting the event and inviting me to speak. I totally agree with the previous speaker, Dr. Surkov, that the restoration of the JCPOA is the only foundation that we could have for further talks in the region and diplomatic dynamics there. And with the Russian approach of building an inclusive regional security system, something that we've never, we've almost seen no effort over the past few decades in the region to do it in a coordinated fashion between global players and regional players alike. I think that, I hope that the coming month or two would bring us good news from Vienna and the future round or rounds of talks there, the seventh at best, would yield a practical result and help us start working on the implementation of the JCPOA, or re-implementation of the JCPOA rather, and think about new domains. As for the Biden administration's thinking, well, we can never speak about on behalf of the administration, but we can try to see the temperature, measure it in Washington, D.C. and in the expert community. And what I initially thought this administration would seek was a quick jump from the restoration of the JCPOA to starting a regional dialogue or a US-Iran dialogue on regional issues, which could involve some of the other interested players. And it seemed to me last year, judging from a number of expert publications and informal dialogues with the US experts, that there was some kind of an illusion that the transfer from restoring the JCPOA to the additional issues, the missile issue and the regional policies issue, could be quick, almost as, could be packed in 1 year. And it seemed like some experts, forgot that even the compartmentalization of the nuclear issue from other regional issues and problems, even with that, the talks on the JCPOA lasted more than 2 years at the final stage. And just adding new questions and issues to the agenda would even more complicate the whole process. So now with the continuing slowly continuing progress in Vienna, I think there is more realistic approach generally in DC as regards the potential for either negotiating JCPOA 2.0 as it was packed as an idea and conceptually previously, or setting up new dialogue formats in the region. I hope that the new understanding, updated understanding of both this administration in the US and the expert community that facilitates and contributes to the dialogue would bring more realism as regards what Farzam previously said, the realistic expectations management as regards the process and the results that it can yield. And I see some of the change in the approaches and thinking in DC, in the expert community in the US, and I think there's more realism in that. One precondition of moving forward with Iran, between US and Iran, of course, is that no new initiative is packed as a JCPOA 2.0. And in addition to the JCPOA, although we understand that the JCPOA serves the foundation for any diplomatic effort, whatever is branded as the an addition to the JCPOA will be perceived in Iran as a new set of demands on the US side that has to be accommodated by the Iranians in exchange for pretty much nothing. And those kind of expectations in Iran, both if we speak about the domestic politics in Iran and Iran as kind of a single rational actor, as the government of Iran, those considerations have to be taken into account. And Iran cannot be singled out as a player or the player that spoils the region and the regional stability, and no new deal is possible just by including Iran or focusing on Iran. And we have to avoid not only the development of diplomatic efforts in that direction, but also the misperception of those diplomatic efforts on the Iranian side. I'm glad that the clear messaging from the Biden administration as regards the restoration of the JCPOA and the communication between US and its regional allies has contributed to the Saudi-Iranian dialogue process in Iraq. We've learned about it since, I think, April. The first leaks were in media. And I think clear messaging is what we need currently as regards to further diplomatic communication here, because if we structure the factors that influence the potential outcome in the region as global or international, involving Russia, US, and other key actors, then regional, involving all regional states, and domestic, we have never seen the alignment of all three levels and actors at all those levels that would promote and sustain diplomatic efforts towards regional security. And although Russia and US can never build a regional security system for the regional states, they have to take lead on that. But I think it is inevitable, and it's necessary that US and Russia, if not are on the same page, but on a similar page on terms of what could be done in the region and what they seek to do in the region. And I've heard, although I don't focus on Afghanistan, there is some fruitful discussion going on between Moscow and Washington as regards the future of Afghanistan, and that is the new initiative of this U.S. government. I think if the two players, meaning our two countries, U.S. and Russia, agree to work as fruitfully on the regional issues in the Middle East as they are currently doing in private mostly on Afghanistan, we can see much more progress than we have been able up until now. I think what is important between US and Russia, if we speak about these two countries, having a global picture, although it may look vague and have different details in each of the interpretations, the Moscow, Washington ones, it has to be coupled with local effort. And we cannot, as Farzam rightly pointed out, one initiative cannot solve all the issues. So keeping in mind this global picture and then trying to join efforts in solving one crisis per time and focusing on them might be a good strategy. And I think with the Yemen crisis being the key topic in the US or in the Iran-Saudi agenda currently, I think we have to join our efforts to replicate this agenda between US, Russia, and other global players, and try to facilitate and feed in some of the ideas and our understanding of how this crisis could be solved. Without just happily observing Iran and Saudi Arabia talk in Baghdad and seeing what they could offer to each other to solve the international community to solve the issue. And much of how expert community could facilitate this process is the track 2, track 1.5 processes that could be paralleled and have different formats, but if all those formats, instead of trying, they communicate between each other as well because of the institutional map is diverse, and just having this global picture of the necessity of build some security system in the region, I think, instead of just dividing into separate groups of experts doing separate things and projects, have to overcome this and facilitate an open dialogue in the field. As for, and Ruslan, please stop me once I have to. As for the Iranian domestic developments, I don't expect a huge change in Iran's regional policy. The president has never been the key decision maker in Iran, and even if he is the second kind of in the hierarchy of decision makers, even constitutionally, he has been his scope of his mandate is described as whatever is left over from after the Supreme Leader makes a decision. And here, I think what could bring a new development here is the political, Iran's political system can become, for the time being, more homogeneous, as across the board, and it has to consider a double sport for the Iranians. On the one side, it is easier to send whatever diplomat from Iran and expect that he has the mandate and he will negotiate equally effectively both with the international counterparts and domestically with other agencies and informal players in Iran. And it would be easier for Raisi's team, let's see who they will be, to negotiate a new deal regionally rather than having reformist diplomats negotiating with conservative decision makers back in Tehran. But on the other side, that cannot last long because the overall stability of the system, if it is represented only by people from one camp, conditional camp of conservatives, for the domestic political cycles that may not last long. So while we are having this consensus among different power branches in Iran on foreign policy agenda, we should seize the opportunity to negotiate and have a constructive discussion on that, in that direction. And I think I will stop here and leave more time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On the technical side of the story, I would like to tell all of our audience today who are watching us online, please kindly write down the comments or questions to the YouTube channel or of the Russian International Affairs Council or our website or Facebook, so that we could address those questions to the speakers. For the time being, also, I would like to mention for the speakers, if they have any questions to other participants of today's meeting, please just raise your hand. I will give the floor to you. And for now, I have, as a moderator, I would like to take this privilege and this right to ask some questions to the speakers. First to the European University Institute experts, and then to RIAC experts, to the Russian participants. So my question, I would like to maybe put it this way. It goes to Farzam or Professor Narbone, if possible. You earlier mentioned, I think that Farzam mentioned about the civil society's political demand for cooperative atmosphere. And as far as I understand, the understanding is that we don't see any demand coming from the society of the states of the region for this, more cooperative approach towards security in the Gulf area. Could you kindly elaborate a bit more on this? Do we see any exceptions of this rule, or in each of the state in the Gulf area, we can't find the part of the population which would, emphasize that the country or the state needs some kind of a security arrangements with the neighbors, because neighbors is something which is important. Neighbors will be there not for decades, but for centuries, and something should be done in this way. I clearly see that there are some demands coming from Iraq and even from the Iraq political foreign policy circles, but do we see any other states in thinking in this way? Please, maybe Farzam and then Professor Narbone, or you decide how we do that.
Okay, sure. So I will start. Shortly I will respond to your question in the sense that I think the UAE-Iran relation is a good example in this regard, particularly when we consider the Dubai as a city that has a large number of Iranian traders and Iranian population, which I think it's playing a role in keeping the UAE-Iran relation at certain level of stability, not going beyond a certain level of hostility. So that impacts, of course, it very much also depends on the political structure in UAE, the type of statehood that exists that led somehow these, let's say, social interests to be channeled into the political, let's say, a process. That example, I think, could be also expanded, but to the Saudi Arabia and Iran. In the case of Saudi Arabia and Iran, you don't have it at all. So basically, the two sides of the two states, on the social level, have very few connections. There are very few people-to-people connections. Of course, there are opportunities for that. That was why, for example, in the book that we've just published, we have devoted 3 chapters to the Hajj, or religious tourism. That is a space that could be this people-to-people, different social stratifications from the two sides could meet and communicate and reduce a level of, let's say, identity clashes, as we know, the Persian-Arab dichotomy or Shiite-Sunni dichotomy. So I think these are the channels that has been less discovered. And that was my point in my earlier intervention, that I think part of the security system actions should be devoted to this dimension, and should respond that how we can expand. First of all, I think we need to expand the spaces that the two sides, civil society, can engage, which I think in the case of Iran and Saudi Arabia, the Hajj, I still think if there is a political will behind that, it could be a space for it, because that's a space that you have all different groups from both sides present on that, let's say, religious pilgrimage. But also increasing the use of the, let's say, people-to-people connection on raising economy, and the case of the UAE and Iran, the trading mechanisms can engage. But one last point and important thing is that, as I said, when we talk about the expansion of tools of security building, it's important that we consider that part of those tools has been already securitized. So when we talk about, for example, religion is securitized already between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So part of this social connection, or let's say social demand, goes to the range of policies and actions that should focus on desecuritization of certain sectors that have been. We just published, for example, last year, a report about how the COVID has been weaponized or securitized in the US-Iran relations. So that is another case that we need to expand the topics into the sectors that are now part of the game. I mean, when we talk about the mutual threat perceptions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I think it's not only about though it's very much important on the military side, but it's not just about the military side. Just last point, adding, for example, the picture of Oman-Iran relation to the dynamic. It's interesting from the sense that all historical ties, the movements between the countries have helped in order to lower down or prevent the formation of threat perceptions in both sides.
Yes, if I can complement what Farzam just said.
Yes, please.
I mean, you rightly point out that there is no very visible demand from the part of civil society of the Gulf countries, Arab countries, and on the one hand, and Iran on the other, to lower the tension. At least it's not, we don't see it. And part of it is because the level of interactions at the people-to-people level is quite limited. I think Farzam rightly pointed out that in spite of everything, trade is still ongoing. Certainly, I mean, you see it in Kuwait, you see it in the UAE, where there are exchanges at the commercial level, and that is an important factor. But much more could be open in terms of people-to-people engagement, and that is clearly a precondition to changing some preconceptions that each population has about the other side. It can be a powerful instrument in reality to create the demand for lowering tension and escape from this vicious cycle in which the other side is depicted as always the aggressor or the pursuant of an aggressive policies. Of course, it goes sometimes in against current policy trends. We have seen it. I mean, for instance, in Saudi Arabia, the rise of a nationalistic discourse that was not necessarily present up to until very few years ago. And we know how difficult it is to break the nationalistic cycle when it fits into the other party nationalism. I think it's one solution, and I think Europe has shown it over the past decades. I mean, you increasing the level of interactions between social communities, people to people, including categories of professionals in the same areas, or looking at finding common responses between the scientific communities to common problems. I was mentioning before climate change and the impact of in the two countries, of desalinization and the impact on the Gulf Sea, the environmental impact. Those are common issues. Bringing together the community, scientific communities, to try to handle those issues would go very far in creating a common understanding. I think it's not something you build from today for tomorrow, but it goes very far when you start increasing the level of interactions. For instance, at the university level, some steps could be taken to create exchanges of students, as we have done in Europe with the Erasmus program, which has been the most powerful tool, if you want, in the European integration process.
Thank you very much. Here comes my questions, actually. Thank you. I mean, that's brilliant. Here come my questions about the about the tools that Russia and Europe has in trying to bridge the gaps and trying to ease the tension between the first and foremost two main capitals in this competition, regional competition in the Gulf area between Riyadh and Tehran. I would like to ask Russian participants, and maybe Dr. Surkov could start answering that. Is there any possibility for Russia and Europe to work together? I mean, enforcing the security arrangement and trust building in this area, or Russia and Europe are just watchers being outside and doing nothing, looking at how Americans and Iranians come to some understanding in the end of the day. Please.
Thank you, Ruslan. First of all, I should say that there is one more tool that can actually help establish people-to-people ties, which is sport. Because sports diplomacy is also a very useful tool, especially in the Gulf, from my point of view, and it shouldn't be neglected. But anyhow, speaking about Russian and European role, I think that both Russian and European role is very much underestimated. Russia has influence in this region because it is a supplier of arms, it is a supplier of food, it is cooperating with the countries of the region, even in the nuclear sphere. So Russia can play a role. As I said in my presentation, Russia is practically the only great power, with the exception of China, I think, that actually can talk freely to both Riyadh and Tehran. But anyhow, the Europeans are also very active in this region. They have military bases, they have military presence, and I think they can also influence the situation. But I think the most efficient way is to bring to combine the influence of at least three players: the EU, the Russian Federation, and the People's Republic of China. Because the Chinese are also very active in this region. They have very strong economic ties with the countries of the region. They have economic influence. And what's more important for them, the stability of the region is essential, because it's vital source of energy for them. So playing together, all these three great powers can actually change the balance, even if the Americans will be against it. But I don't think so. On the contrary, I think while the Americans are an essential military player, well, in the military domain, their presence and influence is still the same. But even the American colleagues, they acknowledge that the US has very little influence in terms of for example, also people-to-people things. They have strong disagreements even with the Saudis on the issue of human rights. So I don't think that we should, on the one hand, we shouldn't underestimate the potential of other players, and we shouldn't overestimate the influence of the US. But of course, but the problem is that the US can play a spoiler role, and that's what they did in 2017. They did. I'm not sure that they can play any constructive role, but if at least other players can pressure Washington into not playing this spoiler role, then we might achieve something. Because actually, what I've noticed in dealing both with the Saudis, with the Iranians, that both sides are interested in reducing tensions. Both sides would like to achieve, well, I know this is not a popular concept here, but I agree that all the regional players were talking about some grand bargain, as was mentioned, and they want to achieve it. But all the parties want guarantees, and we can provide those guarantees. For example, when I was in Beijing before the pandemic, we were talking a lot about combining Russian and Chinese tools to achieve stability in the region, because the Chinese say that they are ready to promote stability through development, through economy. And they were very curious to find out whether Russia can combine its diplomatic and political influence with the Chinese economic strength. So to make to act together in order to stabilize the region. So there is this willingness, and we should simply decide what exactly we would like to achieve and through which means. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I ask Adlan, I see that Farzam was actively preparing something there. Farzam, you wanted to add something here to the Russian-European side of the story on the Gulf?
Yeah, thank you. Just a very short. I agree very much that about the issue of overestimation. There is one point I think that is quite serious here, and that is the fact that the cause route, one of the major cause routes of the tension is, of course, is states' understanding of the imbalance, or let's say military imbalance or power imbalance in the region. So that power imbalance in the region, I mean, when we talk about the EU and Russian role, how that could be responded by these actors, I think that is difficult to say that EU and Russia can engage into responding to this perception of imbalance. That's why the U.S. role becomes important, because U.S. is basically an actor in shaping this balance of power, while Russia and China basically are not, and that's why they can be mediators. So the point is that I think where makes the EU and Russians' role quite important, considering also the bureaucratic issues, because I think when we talk about the Europe, we need to at least consider that this is not a unique creature in a sense that can have one word first, and then second is that there are bureaucratic limits. As I mentioned earlier, the EU's priority are not right now. I think my understanding is that is not the Persian Gulf region. So that this issue of urgency is higher, or priority is higher in North Africa and East Med, and that means that if there is a certain bureaucratic tools to engage, Europe will prioritize the more critical areas according to its strategic assessment. So when we put this factor also, I think the role of Russia and EU could be very much, again, as was mentioned before, a mediator and a facilitator to push the states to talk about their perception of imbalance. Because when it becomes and that's why what the Saudis call that whenever they talk about, okay, I strongly think that we need a region that people in that can talk about their military strategies. So I think at some point, Saudis and Iranians should start talking about that, how they see their way of securing their national territories and how they see their military strategies or military doctrines. And when we talk on this issue, that's where Saudis always say that, okay, they need also the US side to be with them in such a talk. So here is the role, I think, that both the experience of the Cold War on organizing number of arms control and arms talks that Russia had, and also the EU, certain states had a very active role on those Cold War experiences. I think that is something that skill is something, and that platform is something that we need it right now in the region. And this is another concept. Instead of pushing toward missile talks or regional talks, I think clarifying the subject here could be poisonous, because if we clarify the subject as what one state should do, basically that kills any possibility of entering to the discussion. And that's why that is particularly critical also with the new administration in Tehran, that the whole process of talk over military imbalance and regional deterrence should be promoted, I think, between EU and US. Back to you.
Thank you. I would like to give the floor to Adlan, and then maybe for some closing remarks to Professor Narbone, if possible. Please, Adlan.
I would structure my response to your question in 3 bullet points and / questions. Do EU and Russia have enjoy trust and credibility in the region? Can we work together? And what can be done? And my answer might lack a lot of details here, but at least conceptually, I think it's important to think of these 3 items. Trust is not, it is usually the term has a lot of meanings, and sometimes it is perceived as when actor A expects something positive from actor B. I would use trust in my response as in a different meaning, though. It is when actor A knows what to expect from actor B, and if they agree on something, actor B will deliver on this. And then you start trusting your counterpart, even if you disagree with them a lot. And here the Russian role in the region, as perceived by the Iranians, Arabs, and I would speak about others and stick to mostly the Iranian case. I think Russia does play this role, even if Russia has different stance on anything and has disagreements with any regional state. Then they at least know what Russia thinks, or I think so, seemingly. And B, if Russia agrees on something, then Russia will do it in the region. Does EU have similar credibility and capacity and perception in the region? Judging only by the Iranian case, I doubt so. Unfortunately, without the US support of the European or any European initiative, the sovereignty and credibility of the EU as a unified actor is under question. And the coverage of whatever EU has tried to do to solve the JCPOA in Iran was so pessimistic, rightfully pessimistic, that now, there has to be done something, there should be some verifiable deeds on the European side, at least to restore this positive mood in Iran as regards what EU could do to promote regional dialogue. On the EU-Russian potential cooperation, is it possible? Of course it is. We've seen it from after 2014 and the Ukrainian crisis. Despite huge disagreement over those developments, Russian delegation and EU delegation to the Vienna talks, to the nuclear talks, decided to continue working on and spared no effort to succeed. Can we repeat the success? Of course we can. And what could we do and focus on during the future dialogue and cooperation? I think culture building is an important thing that should not be ignored, even if we can do little in terms of practical things, like, do something in the cooperation field, like Europeans can cooperate with the regional countries more actively, and specifically with the Iranians. Russia can, it has its own strong features and capabilities, like arms exports and nuclear power, and etc. But if we can talk to each other and then talk to each of the regional country and government, and it's not about imposing, but promoting the discourse of regional cooperation, not just for the sake of saying nice things, but trying to convince them that they are going to win from cooperation, and kind of nudging them to small steps towards each other, facilitating this and stimulating intellectual thinking process in the region as concerns some potential benefits from regional cooperation. I think this culture building, which is a very long-term process, should not be ignored. And we can easily, just within one day, change our discourse both in Brussels and Moscow, and coordinate that kind of public narratives to facilitate regional dialogue, talk about it more and together. And I think that might somewhat help move forward.
Thank you, Adlan. And maybe some closing thoughts and remarks on the side of Professor Narbone, or.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ruslan. I think it was quite interesting, the last remarks by Adlan on culture building and converging of international players and regional players towards a discourse that promotes gradually regional cooperation. I think this could represent the baseline for all the players to work together and create both the culture in the region, as well as the expectations that regional cooperation will indeed bring about dividends for all actors. And that goes back to our first point, that it can only be done gradually and on a step-by-step approach. But changing the atmospheric, it's a big part of the game. If you can move actors away from the current confrontational vision of the neighborhood and towards gradually taking on board the positive aspects that can emerge from increased cooperation, creating more predictability from in the region and from outside players, avoiding the sliding into increased tensions, of finding ways to, when there are reasons for tension, find this way to stop it before it escalates. Those are all important steps, and I think they are clearly in the interest of all, both the regional players, the countries in the Persian Gulf, and the broader international community. So I certainly agree that we could close on this note that perhaps we should all talk more about the benefits of regional cooperation and try to put some deeds behind also the talking.
Thank you very much. It was really greatly prepared and set discussion today. I would like to just in the end thank all our those watching us online, all the participants and speakers of this meeting. Once again, I would like to congratulate the European University Institute and the Middle East programs, Middle East directions with the book Stepping Away from the Abuse, a Gradual Approach Towards a New Security System in the Persian Gulf. It's I mean, really congratulate you with that. I think that these discussions are important, and we will have we are now having more food for thought, and we'll continue to look at this issue on the security in the Persian Gulf in our programs in RIAC as well. So I would like to again thank you very much, and let's continue our discussion in our next events. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.